welcome to the January edition of The Coffee House, where in the next hour, global trade talks collapse as protesters and police clash. We've got the view from the streets of Seattle, then keeping kids off the streets of Takoma Park and Silver Spring. Community Bridges aims to rescue at-risk girls. Genes and problem drinking, the latest evidence and what it means with Dr. Enoch Gordis, director of the National Institute of Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism. Author Carolivia Herron on her controversial children's book, Nappy Hair, the contemporary Celtic sounds of tinsmith, plus a Rebecca the Ariel poem. And we visit historic Fells Point in Baltimore. Hi, and welcome to the Coffee House. Back in my student activist days, the early 70s, I used to mix it up with campus conservatives over Vietnam and civil rights. But one night, before a half-filled, half-awake auditorium, my debate foe took an unexpected detour. "What's your position," he challenged, "on free trade?" I'm not sure what half-baked words passed from my lips, but I am sure my body language said, "Huh?" Trade was not an issue my generation of campus insurgents went to the streets over. But that was precisely the issue that turned downtown Seattle into an armed camp the week of November 29th. WTO, World Trade Organization delegates from 135 countries assembled at the Seattle Convention Center, where they tried to for the millennium round of trade negotiations. They came in the name of free trade. The protesters rallied under the banner of fair trade. Their quarrel was with top government officials and corporate executives, but someone forgot to tell that to the police. The protesters were especially aggrieved over WTO tribunals, panels that can declare our country's or any country's environmental laws or labor standards to be illegal barriers to trade. What was it like on the Seattle barricades? With us is a participant observer who spent a week in the line of fire, independent web journalist John Tarleton. Welcome to the Coffee House.
Thank you, Mark. It's great to be here.
John, I suspect that in the public mind, based upon the images people saw on TV, that they came away with two basic impressions of Seattle. One, that the trade talks failed, and two, that kids vandalized and looted shops. Both of those things are true, isn't it? Aren't they?
I think the media, construed a lot of the reporting around the window smashing and the trash fires. What was really going on in the streets in Seattle, especially on November 30th, the day the WTO was shut down, is there was an intricate, well-organized, and peaceful direct action that was launched from 13 different directions at dawn, and I was in Sector H.
We'll get more into detail on that.
Okay, but anyway, there was this intricate, well-organized mass action that involved people coming from all directions and sitting down on the sidewalks around the convention center and locking arms. And where I was, we spent several hours like that, just locking arms and forming human walls that prevented the delegates from entering. But it was an overwhelmingly peaceful scene. Those people who chose not to lock arms and risk arrest were singing and dancing and drumming, and it was a big street party. And around 10 o'clock, the tear gas and the pepper spray and the bullets started to fly. And then later in the day is when a handful of kids, apparently mostly from Eugene, Oregon, came through downtown smashing windows, etc. And that, because that was the most spectacular, most sensational imagery, that became the lead story.
Let's talk about the direct action and how it was organized. You came to Seattle, I guess, about a week before the WTO meeting was scheduled to happen, and you happened upon what was called, 420 East Denny or something?
Right. The Direct Action Network, which is an umbrella group for numerous grassroots activist groups all over the West Coast, had set up a welcome center for other activists who were coming to Seattle in a sprawling warehouse at 420 East Denny, which is about a little less than a mile from downtown on a hill overlooking downtown.
And what went on there?
What went on there? Just about everything. It was a supercharged beehive in there. There was nonviolent training sessions. There was puppet making. There was dance and theater. There was a kitchen that was feeding first hundreds and later thousands of meals a day. There were meeting sessions where these were groups from all 13 sectors that would later seize the streets, worked on plans for their actions. And so it was just a nonstop center of activity.
Okay, and that's where the street demonstrations by the protesters were planned, at least a portion of the protesters, the environmental protesters, human rights protesters, not the labor element of the protest.
Well,
right?
what was going on is there was several layers of groups. So the AFL-CIO, of course, did a big march and a big rally.
I'll tell you what. We have some videotape of events, especially on November 30th, where most of the media attention has focused. We're going to take a look. Let's go and take a look at that and talk about what we see.
Okay.
Early on, I gather, in the protests, we're seeing basically a collage right now of events. But early on the day of Tuesday, November 30th, as I gathered, the protesters were in the streets. You were part of a group trying to ring the convention center, and various smaller groups trying to block the entire circumference of the convention center to keep the delegates out. And we're seeing that now, where people are trying to block the delegates from getting into the convention center.
Right.
Then some of your number sat down on the ground.
What had happened is at dawn, even before these, there was 2 marches that came from opposite directions at 7:30 in the morning, but even before that, many of us had already sat down to block the intersections, and these 2 marches were basically reinforcements.
Okay, now we're seeing people sitting in the streets, and the police have moved in.
Yes.
The police came and left several times, and there was a...
now you got the marchers coming in as basically as reinforcements, and those are some steel workers there.
Right. Now we're beginning to see the police setting on the demonstrators. What was the provocation that led to... This is pepper spray, I guess, that we're seeing right here.
Very burning in the eyes.
What were the protesters doing that provoked this response?
The protesters were sitting down and they weren't leaving.
Why didn't the cops just drag them away?
That's a good question. They had advanced knowledge.
Now they're shooting rubber bullets. I guess,
they had advanced knowledge. My best guess is, one, that they just weren't prepared, and second of all, I don't think the feds wanted the Clinton administration wanted to have a photo situation of peaceful protesters being dragged away. I think they would have preferred to have something like this, riot and mayhem. I don't know. It's hard to say. The Seattle police were underprepared, and then they later overreacted. It's been an apathetic country for a long time, so maybe they just, despite all the advance notice, couldn't believe that people could get it together.
Now we see an armored personnel carrier approaching a demonstration. This is all the morning of Tuesday, November 30th, right? And they're spraying what, pepper gas? Pepper?
Right.
Spray?
I think this is I'm not sure, but that looked like the intersection I was at. But
I didn't see you there, Jim.
Yeah, I was bent over trying to breathe, but. Anyway, I think with that armored, these Darth Vader cops going around beating up on people, it's maybe a glimpse of the WTO world of the future.
So, how did you protect yourself when you?
I had nothing more than a red bandana, and before the police came in, we smeared vinegar on the inside of the bandana, and that partially neutralizes the tear gas, but it wasn't enough. Wasn't enough for me. I was pretty crumpled over after a couple of minutes of tear gas.
Vinegar wasn't enough.
Wasn't enough, and people near me were getting hit with rubber bullets. And it's very difficult for the police to remove a group of people who are connected in that way. And so and those people are very vulnerable. It takes an amazing amount of courage to do something like that.
Now we're looking at scenes from the night.
Yeah.
And it looked to me a little bit like maybe some of these folks were people who were possibly, were there organized protests at night, or were these folks looking for trouble, or maybe bored, or were they already for the activity and looking for something to do? What's
By nightfall, most of the protesters had already gone home, because we had more to do the next day, and this was the remnants of all of that. And yeah, these are basically a handful of kids who are probably looking to hang around and keep on mixing it up. But unfortunately, the police followed them up into a civilian neighborhood, and hundreds of innocent people, including many children, were assaulted by the tear gas that was launched on this neighborhood called Capitol Hill. It was terrible.
Yeah.
To see someone with their two-year-old daughter in their arms, and they'd just been tear gassed.
Most of the labor protests that occurred that day, there was an AFL-CIO rally. We actually had tape of it. We lost it somehow in the process of showing the tape. But there was a large labor rally, but those folks really weren't involved in any of the confrontations with the police that day. But the next day there was a steelworkers rally, I gather. And at the end of that, the steelworkers, some of the steelworkers and the environmental, the Young Protest Direct Action Network folks kind of fused a bit. And there was more tear gassing, I gather.
And more people who, on the next day, on the 1st of December, was when most of the 600 people were arrested. Martial law had already been declared the night before by the mayor, because the president was coming to town. And yeah, and there was the steelworkers, especially some of the steelworkers, I think, from Spokane, Washington, who they've been locked out of their steel mill for 14 months, and the man who owns Kaiser Steel also is clear-cutting forests down in Northern California. So you have steelworkers and Earth First people who've made common cause, and
it'll be interesting to see if that common cause persists. Tom Hayden made the comment that the events in Seattle were more significant than what happened at the Chicago Democratic Convention in 1968, in that it brought together a wider demographic groups, labor, environmentalists, students, that weren't together in 1968, and it wasn't about a single issue. It's about something very large in trade. Was this some kind of extraordinary spasm that occurred in Seattle, in your view, or is this does this portend a trend that we're going to see in the future?
I think it's the part of a larger trend. I think people are waking up both to what the WTO is about. It's an octopus whose tentacles reach into every corner of our lives, and I think they're waking up to much of the inhumanity of corporate globalization, where profits are put before people. I think part of the reason Hayden thought it was so significant, and I would agree, is that it, I think, represents a second globalization, a globalization of social activism, because these issues that we're being engaged in, they reach around the whole world. There are people from all over the world who are in Seattle bringing their grievances, and it was really exciting to see that. Globalization itself doesn't have to be a bad thing. It's what kind of globalization we create.
Good question, and we're going to have to leave it at that, I'm afraid. Many thanks to journalist John Tarleton for his recollections and thoughts on the events in Seattle. To read his piece on Seattle and other articles by John Tarleton, visit his website at www.cybertraveler.org. Still to come, Dr. Enoch Gordis on genes and alcoholism, Nappy Hair author Carolivia Herron, a visit to Baltimore's Fells Point, and the new Celtic sounds of Tinsmith.
This group of Takoma Park and East Silver Spring schoolgirls is gathered here at Long Branch Community Center for an arts project. The goal of this project, learn how different cultures celebrate the holiday season. These youngsters are among the 60 participants in Jumpstart Girls Adelante Niñas, The program aims to give at-risk girls ages 9 to 12 a boost. It's about mentoring, motivating, and empowering. It's about finding inner strength by looking out the window rather than in the mirror. Jumpstart Girls is the first program of a Silver Spring-based group called Community Bridges.
Some of the groups went out to senior centers this week, and they did oral histories with the seniors and did an arts project with them.
Dr. Naomi Nam founded the group just 2 years ago, but Nam says the program is already having a positive effect on the girls' classroom performance and self-esteem.
And some of those same girls who were so shy last year were speaking out about issues of wealth and poverty and homelessness and so on.
One of those girls is 10-year-old Io Jaji, a 5th grade student at Rolling Terrace Elementary School. Jaji says Jumpstart Girls has made her more aware of the suffering around her.
We are a community together. All of us are one, and we can help other people.
Girls like Io Joji attend weekly 2.5-hour programs at one of 4 schools. There are also monthly mother-daughter workshops that focus on such things as team building, health and prevention, creative expression, and community action. Jumpstart Girls encourages friendship across ethnic and racial lines and aims to help participants discover their varied talents. Case in point, Jumpstart Girls encourages Phai Thi Tak, a Vietnamese refugee, to set her sights high. She wants to be a basketball player or a singer. But for now, Jumpstart Girls is also pressing tack to be more in tune at home.
I'm like really lazy. I don't like to really clean because I'm always doing my homework and I'm like really stressful. So I just always, now from learning going to the program, now I like help my parents and wash the dishes, clean the bathroom or whatever.
Many of the Jumpstart Girls live in low-income apartments like this one on Carroll Avenue, where after-school opportunities are few and successful role models all too rare. That's what's drawn some young adults like Jamie Cooper to Community Bridges. Jamie is a University of Maryland student and a part-time youth leader with the group. She benefited from a similar program as a girl.
I've seen what it's done for me, and I think it's very important to let them be assured of themselves, to know what they want and let them go after it.
Though founded in 1997, Community Bridges has already managed to succeed in attracting funding from a number of private foundations and government agencies. The program is open to at-risk girls from the 4th through the 8th grades. For the Coffee House, I'm Ross Adams.
Hi, and welcome to In Sickness and in Health at the Coffee House. The chances are that someone close to you, maybe it is you, has a drinking problem. 14 million Americans, or 1 in 13 adults, do. Why is it that some people drink away their lives while others partake only socially or abstain altogether? A character flaw? Scientists now know that genes play a substantial role in determining whether we're apt to misuse alcohol. Does this mean that if your father was an alcoholic, you will be too? Or if you have no family history of the disease, can you safely drink all that you want? Are we on the verge of testing human embryos to see who is programmed to become a drunk driver? And if so, what will we do with that knowledge? Here to answer these questions is Dr. Enoch Gordis, Director of the National Institute on Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism, part of the National Institutes of Health. Welcome to the Coffee House, Dr. Gordis.
Thank you very much, Kathy.
Alcoholics come in all shapes and sizes, just about any age as well. Is there any group that's immune in the world?
No, there's no group that's immune, but there are some groups which have more or less tendency to develop problems from alcohol once they start drinking.
And alcohol abuse is different from alcohol dependence. We'll perhaps have a quick look at that. But it amounts to the same. It means a problem with drinking that is going to affect many aspects of your life.
That's right. Whether you're an alcohol abuser or an alcoholic, which is now called alcohol dependent syndrome, in both cases, you can have severe troubles either for yourself or for the people around you. The alcohol-dependent person who's colloquially
full of people who were alcoholics, had children who often became alcoholics. But perhaps you can explain it's not a single gene that is now being sought for, but many genes that could give a person a propensity towards alcoholism.
That's right, Cathy. Unlike many of the genetic diseases which I think our listeners are familiar with, such as cystic fibrosis or sickle cell disease or Huntington's disease, these are diseases caused by changes in a single gene. There are two aspects to this. First, it's a single gene, and second of all, if you have this mutation, you're going to get the disease. In the case of alcoholism, it's different in these two respects. First of all, it's a risk for the disease, not that you're destined to have the disease. And second of all, it's not a single gene which is going to lead to this risk, but rather a collection of genes. Each one of us plays a partial role in setting up the risk, but no single gene is responsible for it.
They haven't found the genes yet, have they?
Well, due to the efforts of many investigators over the last 10 years, in the collaborative study on the genetics of alcoholism, which our institute has supported, we now know locations on the chromosomes where the genes are likely to be. But we haven't found the genes yet, and I believe in the next 5 or 10 years we will have them.
Goodness. And will this lead to any tests that someone could give even to a child to know whether or not they should steer clear of alcohol in their lives in any form?
I think that the success of finding genes for the risk for alcoholism will have several impacts. One of them, I think, will be to develop new treatments for alcoholism, because we'll know much better than we do now which chemicals in the brain, for example, are not quite right. And these chemicals which are not quite right can become the targets for developing new medications to help people stay sober. Another possible result of knowing the genes is that we'll be able to do more focused prevention efforts. So even in a family which we know is a high-risk family because the parents are drinking, we might better be able to discriminate between those children of those parents, some of whom are at risk for alcoholism and some of whom are not. And I think we will have the ability to do that too when we find the genes.
The genes aren't, of course, 100%. The environment plays a tremendous role in triggering whether someone actually develops alcoholism. Could you perhaps explain what the maximum is, perhaps, in our genes that would send us along that track, and then the kind of things that would work against bringing out alcoholism?
As we mentioned before, the diseases where many genes are associated with that disease, they're called polygenic diseases. These diseases usually are a setup for risk, as we say, and not for destiny. So therefore, even if you have this collection of genes which increase your risk for developing alcoholism, you're not destined to have alcoholism, because there are many. At the same time, the genes are not the whole story either, because there are many environmental influences on the risk for alcoholism, such as peer pressure, advertising, and many other things that happen in the environment. For example, even such a thing as whether the price of alcohol is low or high. So there are many environmental influences which collaborate with the genetic vulnerability to lead to alcoholism. Not only that, it may be that the genes that we find will be such that they determine how susceptible you are to the environmental influences. So this network of genes and environment is a very complex one indeed, one which I believe will be unraveling in the next 10 or 15 years.
So one aspect of that could be ability to handle stress. Someone who has a very low tolerance maybe would turn to alcohol to soothe the stress level more quickly than someone who doesn't have that
The whole
particular
question of the role of stress
Right.
in developing alcoholism is a very important one which we're working on both in man and in animals.
And what are some of the other aspects one's looking at apart from stress?
Well, we know, for example, that the way the brain cells work is by communication with one another, and they do so by virtue of one brain cell sending out a neurotransmitter substance which docks on the surface of the next brain cell. Now, these docking molecules, or these receptors on the surface of cells, come in all flavors. And one of the things that we're looking at now is how either alcohol changes the structure of these receptors by virtue of drinking for many years, or how people may differ even before they started drinking in the nature of the receptors on the cells of their brain. Now, the genetics is going to contribute to understanding how these receptor changes occur if you were born with them. So this mix of the effects of alcohol as well as the vulnerability to alcohol in studying receptors of the brain is a very active part of our work now.
And in seeking treatment, it's very important, of course.
That
follow
too,
these.
and in the last few years, of course, our neuroscience experiments have led to the development of new medications, such as naltrexone, to help people stay sober.
That's the first new medication in many, many years, isn't it?
It's the first new medication for helping people stay sober after they've been removed from alcohol that's been approved for use by the Food and Drug Administration.
What can someone do before the tests come out, once we do define the area, genetic areas that could be problem areas? If they have many alcoholics in their family, what are some of the signs that they should look for, perhaps in themselves, or just steps they should take to try and prevent themselves following along that path?
There are several things that can be done. One important finding of the last few years by Dr. Mark Schuckett in California has been that young people who seem to have a hollow leg, that is, they can drink their friend under the table, that is, they're less sensitive to the effects of alcohol before they become alcoholic. These people have a much higher risk of becoming alcoholic, say, 10 years at the age of 30. And so we know that one of the things that a young person can do who comes from an alcoholic family is to be very aware of how he or she is handling alcohol. If they find they're beginning to give it a very high priority, or they find that they can handle it better than their friends, that's not a good sign, that's a warning sign.
Mm-hmm. Any other warning signs?
Well, when alcohol becomes a priority in life, what happens is that the drinking becomes a more central activity in life than many other things. So things tend to become neglected. If you're a young person, you neglect your friendships, you neglect your studies, you may get into trouble with traffic crashes, and so on. There are all sorts of early signs before you become an alcoholic where you're still in control of your drinking. These signs ought to be heeded.
Okay. I'd like to talk about the good gene, if you like, for alcoholism. There are some groups of people in Asia who just don't become alcoholics. Perhaps you could talk a little bit about the good gene that's been identified already.
Well, whether it's good or not is a matter for judgment, but it certainly is different.
Yes.
Almost half of the Asian populations in Japan, China, Korea, and so on have a change or a mutation in one of the genes that has to do with how the body metabolizes alcohol. That is, how the body changes alcohol into another compound, which it then eliminates finally, which is not alcohol. It turns out that in almost half the Asian population, there is a mutation in this gene. So one of the byproducts of alcohol metabolism collects in the body in a higher concentration. Flushing, sometimes nausea, sometimes faintness, generally feeling pretty crummy. And if you have a double dose of this gene, you tend to react so poorly to alcohol that you're highly unlikely to become an alcoholic. If you have only one copy of this gene and one normal variant of this gene in the pair of genes, then you will flush somewhat less intensively, the whole reaction will be less severe, and your chances of becoming an alcoholic are still lower than the general population with normal genes in that respect. But still in all, you're more at risk for alcoholism than the people who have both copies of this mutant gene. One of the interesting things about this is that as the population of Japan was studied over a 15-year period, people who had a double dose of this gene seem to be always protected from alcoholism, no matter whether you're studying them in the late 1970s or close to 1990. But those who had only one copy, whose flushing was less severe, seemed to be more influenced by the social pressures to drink that went along with Japanese social changes. And so the number of alcoholics among the people who had only one copy of this protective gene tended to increase over 15 years, which is a beautiful demonstration of the relationship between genes and environment.
A very complex one indeed. Well, we have run out of time, I'm sorry to say. A big thank you to Dr. Enoch Gordis for sharing his views on the link between our genetic makeup and our predisposition towards the troubling disease of alcoholism. I'm Cathy Kristiansen, and this has been In Sickness and in Health.
Still ahead, Rebecca Villarreal poem, Nappy Hair author Carolivia Herron, music by Tinsmith, and introducing The Weekend Traveler.
Barber Mikulski, abolitionist Frederick Douglass, and clothing manufacturer Levi Strauss all have in common? They all lived in the Fells Point neighborhood of Baltimore. You may know Fells Point as the night spot for the young and the hip. It is that and much, much more. If not for Mikulski and a web of neighborhood activists, Fells Point as we know it would not be here today.
Was going to be destroyed for an expressway, and I joined with some other people who are interested in the 18th century houses here.
Fells Point is so wonderful. There are 200 18th century houses here. No other place has this. It's incredible that it's so unknown.
Because the water was very deep right here at dockside, most of the ships coming into Baltimore Harbor wanted to dock here because Baltimore Harbor was very shallow and you couldn't get into the harbor, so they wanted to dock here. And in 1763, Edward Fell and his wife determined that they were going to take their farm and turn it into a town. By 1773, Fells Point was sold, and sold so well that Baltimore Town annexed them because they didn't want an upstart village taking over Baltimore Town.
But Fells Point has more than survived, and today it offers great places to eat, shop, stay, and have fun. Fells Point offers a rich variety of ethnic, regional, and new American cuisine. As for accommodations on the high end, there's the Admiral Fell Inn with 80 rooms and European-style decor. And if you want to be directly on the water, there's the inn at Henderson Wharf. For a more modest budget, but still elegant accommodations, there's the Ann Street Bed and Breakfast. For the Weekend Traveler at the Coffee House with Steve Olson, I'm Chuck Barber.
Welcome to Writer's Block at the Coffee House. Children's books include a wide range of subject matter, from young boys in wizard school and the Harry Potter books to biography and traditional folk tales. They tap into our imagination as well as our history and culture. They open doors for our children, introducing them to the joys of the written word. But one children's book opened up the door to controversy as well. Last year in Brooklyn, New York, a teacher so incensed black parents she was forced to leave an elementary school. The teacher, a white woman, had read the book Nappy Hair to her elementary school students and was ultimately accused of racism, which is ironic since the book Nappy Hair is a celebration of African American heritage, not a racist diatribe. With me to discuss this book is the author, Carolivia Herron. Carolivia Herron is a professor of English with a specialization in epic tradition. She has taught at Harvard University and California State University at Chico. Her previous books include Thereafter Johnny and the poetry of Angelina Weld Grimke. She lives in Takoma, D.C. Welcome to the Coffee House.
Thank you very much.
And I should also mention that you have a cough too, and so we appreciate your coming to be with us tonight.
I'm glad to be here.
So would you talk a little bit about the controversy with the book? What happened in New York when this book?
Well, Ruth Sherman, the white teacher in Brooklyn, New York, I read this book to her third grade class, And they loved the book, and they enjoyed the call and response quality of it. And I hope you'll hear a little later on how the call and response make it a very exciting book. These are children who had never read before in their lives and never had asked for a book. And she gave them all photocopies of it because they begged for it. The first time in their lives they'd ever asked to have a book.
Right.
They took the copies home, and one of the parents became very upset, decided that the teacher was a member of the Klan, the Ku Klux Klan, accused her of all manner of things, returned to the school with 50 people, and essentially chased her out of the building. And had actually called the news media beforehand, so they chased her out of the building into the cameras. Basically a lynch mob of sorts. And she was removed from the school, later reinstated, but she couldn't go back because there was no apology and no attempt to really make anything better again.
Yeah, yeah. And the parents were so angry because of a misunderstanding?
I have to interpret now because who knows what they were thinking. But first of all, the photocopy equipment of this country is not geared to dark faces.
Right.
And so the photocopies did not do justice to the complexity of the picture here.
Right.
And secondly, it was a white teacher, and so they just assumed that any white person using the word nappy was using it as an insult. And thirdly, the word nappy itself is a problem for many black people. It's often used as a black-on-black insult, and they assumed that it was used as in an insulting way.
Now, when you set out to write this book, did you plan to write the book about nappy hair? I mean, did you plan to?
But this is the biggest irony of all is that I was trying to write about African American oral poetry and epic poetry because I love epic poetry. That's the love of my life. Yeah. And I've been seeking all my life, as long as I can remember, at least since junior high school, to find African American epic poetry. And had received this grant to open up the Center for the Study of Epics at Harvard University. We were studying the epics of Europe and Asia and Latin America and all these other groups. And I said, well, let me find our own, an African American one. And I started listening to my uncle's storytelling. My Uncle Richard, who's a wonderful storyteller. He lives right out in Kenilworth to this right now here in D.C. Well, this is not here, but in D.C.
Sure.
But anyway, I thought I would record him telling a story, and lo and behold, the story he decides to tell is the story of my nappy hair that day. Now, of course, he tells many stories, and I didn't have to choose nappy hair.
Right.
But I wanted something very important to be the plot, the vehicle for telling the story of how wonderful our poetry is, an African-American oral tradition.
And this uncle, your real uncle, becomes Uncle Mordecai in the book.
Yes, and I become Brenda. Actually, this is me. That's
you.
Not clear. I'm little Brenda. I have
Brenda.
the absolute nappiest hair in the world. I'm a card-carrying, nappy-haired child, and all the cousins who grew up near me in age, the girl cousins, nobody could compare with the kind of hair I had. My hair, would go back you just look at what it just zip, it was gone,
Right. But this is presented as a good thing by this uncle.
And my uncle, you see, he and I had wonderful time having our stories, and even though the person who did the illustrations didn't know me, he really captured what happened. When in one of the pictures, I remember the little girl Brenda is dancing around in a circle with the uncle, and that's just how we were. And yes, I've got the nappiest hair in the world, and nothing can compare with it, and all the things it could do, and how we associated it with many things that goes beyond hair. As I've mentioned to you and to others, it seems on the surface to be talking about hair only, but if you look at it carefully, he's praising me for my use of language, it's in the form of an African praise song.
And individuality.
Yes,
and
resilience.
Yes, yes. Would you talk a little bit about the praise song, the call and response?
Yes,
what this book is?
I think the call and response, if I may say this, in my belief, the greatest gift the African American people have given to ourselves and to the world is call and response. It's a way of talking and of telling a story that if somebody doesn't answer back, the story cannot go a step further. And I think there's lots of call and response in the world.
Especially in church.
But in church, yeah. Even though my uncle he doesn't go to church that often, I must tell you. But he knows the rhythm.
He knows how to do it.
He knows the rhythms of it. And you have to just answer back. If you don't answer back, the story dies.
Right.
finally, you know, it's an emblem of democracy, because it's like you can't have just one person standing somewhere telling the story. You've got to have people answering back and saying yes, and ain't it the truth, and all right.
You tell it.
Exactly. And there are lots of other things that are in the story that I use actually to compare it to the Homeric epics. I love the Homeric epics, the Iliad and the Odyssey, and I actually showed in my lectures on Nappy Hair on this story how many elements that my uncle uses here are used also by the Homeric poet. Primarily the use of the blues here I take as very similar to the use of formula in the Greek epic. Anyway, it's just one of the many things.
Very interesting. Well, it's the whole thing of language. It's the whole sort of dance.
Yes, well, he's praising the child for language.
Right.
This is what my uncle was praising me for. That going back to the praise song. He when he's telling the story about the nappy hair, and everybody says, "Oh, how can you talk about her hair like that? You ought to be ashamed." He says, "I'm not ashamed. I'm proud." Because she talks so well.
Yes.
So it's actually a praise song about speech
as
well as about hair.
Well, would you read to us a little bit?
I certainly will. And this is the section in which the little girl is dancing right on through all that wimp hair. This is the coming of the nap from Africa to America. Dance right on through all that wimp hair. Didn't want it. Wouldn't slow down. Wouldn't mix. Wouldn't slow down for nobody. Wouldn't do it. Every time they tried to mess with her hair, I can see it. She stomped it, kicked it, snuck on around it, came on through. That's what she did. Think she'd playing football, basketball, or something. Yep, dribbling on down the line. She's the one. And when she was born, we remember, when we looked down on her in the cradle, what did we see? We all shout out and jump back. Did we jump? Laugh and shout. Because I tell you, she had the kinkiest, the nappiest, the fuzziest, the most screwed up, squeezed up, knotted up, tangled up, twisted up, nappiest. I'm telling you, she had the nappiest hair you've ever seen in your life. That's what it was. And the Lord, well, the Lord in heaven, what you say? The Lord who brought the Israelites out of Egypt. Yes, he did. He looked down on this cute little brown baby girl. He looked at her and he said, well done. Yep, he said, I got me one. That's what he said. One nap of her hair is the only perfect circle in nature. Well, I got me a cute little brown baby girl. Keep talking. I got me at long last this cute little brown baby girl. Well, and she's got the nappiest hair in the world. Ain't it the truth?
Oh, that's
so
great.
There you have the uncle calling and the people answering back. I'm trying to take both parts for you. Yeah, I think it's a delight how anybody could be mad at my little cute little book. I don't know.
Oh, it's so well. You mentioned before too. It's that word nappy.
Yeah.
It's got so much weight.
Yes, and I I thought we'd gotten over that in the '60s, and I should have known better, perhaps. But
well,
but it I didn't find it a problem anymore.
It's also the whole subject of hair. In our community.
Yeah, and hair is big stuff always.
Big stuff.
Well, I wanted big stuff to carry an important message, because that line, one nap of her hair is the only perfect circle in nature. That's about everybody. That goes beyond the little girl. That's African American resilience. And the hair's resilience is compared to the people's resilience in that the strength.
Well, it's that old adage: you take lemon and you make lemonade.
Yeah.
I mean, it's that whole it's turn it around and back on itself. So it's quite lovely. And the illustrations which our viewers are seeing are by Joe Cepeda, who they're just wonderful.
Yes.
And it's just a very nicely put together book, I think.
Yes, he's wonderful. We had a talk. He called me after he finished doing it, and he really said this was the book of his life. At that point, he enjoyed it so much.
So this book has really changed your life, though.
Oh, my life.
You went from being a fairly academic life to
a quiet little. And I left Harvard and Brandeis and MIT and went to this small little Chico to have a quiet little life.
Right.
And then this book hit, and now I'm all over the country talking about it to schools of education. But it is kind of grievous that some schools are banning the book.
And you've had some news about Maryland schools.
Maryland, yes, indeed. I was trying to get it into one of the Montgomery County schools, and I was uninvited. After being invited, I was told that it could not be taught in the Montgomery County public schools and then this one person tried to get me to come to Montgomery County Library, and she said that the library wouldn't take it either. Wouldn't let me teach there.
You need to talk to the American Library Association. You know, I mean, it just doesn't sound right.
Well, you know, I've tried to do certain things, but I decided the best way is through conversation, not by fighting.
Yes.
You know, just to talk about it, and perhaps somebody will understand what I'm trying to do.
Well, and thank goodness you're out there doing that.
Okay.
You know, you're really turning it around. So we're running out of time, but I just want to thank you for coming, and to also mention that you're working on a novel for adults. Your second novel is coming up. So we'll look for that. We'll know that that's...
Function at the Junction.
Is that the name of it?
It should be out.
And you said that that would be a fun book, too?
Yes,
that you
it's a happy book, indeed. It's a coming to Africa and going back to America and getting our act together with all sorts of people.
What a
telling
nice idea.
Telling the wonderful stories.
Yes, what a great idea. So we're on our way then. Thanks to author Carolivia Herron for joining me in the coffee house. Again, her new book is called Nappy Hair. I'm Lisa Page, and this has been Writer's Block.
Wide like mine, I think we could be sisters when I see her hips and thighs amble through the bookshelves at Vertigo. I did not know her pain then, the daughter, success above all, girl lost without a father, just 9 years old, graduated at the Head. Head Start gave her milk and cereal every morning. One time we sneak into a theater to see Sandra Cisneros. Only one ticket left and two of us. She goes in first, ticket ripped in half. Always the politician, she gets another half from an insider. I'm waiting outside wondering where this chica has gone. Then out she comes, gripping her stomach, groaning. We head for the bathroom where she stands upright with a smile and pulls the ticket from her pocket. I want to squeal with a child's delight, but she raises her finger to her lips. Shh. I smile wide and let her return to the theater, count to 10 slowly before leaving the bathroom, show my stub at the door where the docent lady welcomes me. Bright eyes alive with freedom, Estelita greets me, hips, thighs, and smile.
As we were out a-hunting one morning in the spring, both hounds and horses running well, may the hills and the valleys ring. But to our great misfortune, no fox there could be found. Our huntsmen cursed and swore, but still no fox moved over the ground. And up spoke our master huntsman, the master of the chase. If only the devil himself come by, we'd run him such a race. And up there sprung like lightning a fox from out of his hole. His fur was the color of the starless night, and his eyes like burning coals. And they chased him over the valleys, and they chased him over the hills. They to chase him down to the river bank, but never would he yield. And he's jumped into the water, and he swum to the other side, and he's laughed so loud that the greenwood shook, and then he's turned to the huntsman and he's cried, "Ride on, my gallant huntsman, when must I come again? And you shall never want for a fox to chase all over the glen. And when your need is greatest, just call upon my name, and I will come and you shall have the best of sporting again." And the men looked up in wonder, and the hounds run back to hide, for the fox had changed to the devil himself, where he stood on the other side. And the men, the hounds, the horses, went flying back to town, and hard on their heels come a little black fox, laughing as he ran. "Oh, ride on, my gallant huntsman, when must I come again? And you shall never want for a fox to chase all over the glen. And when your need is greatest, just call upon my name, and I will come and you shall have the best of sporting again. Oh, ride on, my gallant huntsman, when must I come again? For you shall never want for a fox to chase all over the glen."
Great. I'd like to welcome Tim Smith to the musical traditions segment of Takoma Coffee House.
Thanks a lot.
It was very strange. I was backstage there, and I got so into the song that I forgot that I had to jump up and interview you guys.
Good.
That's a good thing,
yeah.
And it's just, and you did that in just 3 or 4 minutes.
Yeah.
Obviously, you play Celtic music. The question would be, what form are you? Are you traditional? Are you contemporary?
Definitely not traditional.
Okay, and what would you say the difference is?
Well, we'd get bored.
Yeah,
And
well.
so, yeah. Well, Rowan plays a lot of like Ani DeFranco, and that works its way into our repertoire, and we're sort of heading in the quasi-Irish rock direction.
No. Are you doing any original tunes? Doing any
Yeah,
songwriting?
we do a lot actually.
And do you write that in the genre, let's say, of contemporary?
Oh, about
Celtic?
half and half.
Yeah.
Half and half.
So it's a good sound.
Thanks.
And where do you think you'll be in 2 years with this music?
Hopefully touring the country again, only doing, instead of Renaissance festivals, doing big folk venues.
Yeah, yeah. If you could play at any festival, let's say in the next year.
Oh boy.
Yeah, what one would you like? I told you I was going to give you some
Yeah.
tough questions here. That was
Well, of
softballs
course,
here.
there's always the Philly Folk Festival.
Yeah.
That's a big one.
Yeah.
We had sort of this ambition to do the Lilith thing, the
Yeah.
Lilith tour.
Yeah, that would work.
Yeah.
That would work. You guys probably don't like playing in bars. You like more concert setting.
Yeah.
But that's a difference. There are Celtic
Yeah.
bands that love to play bars, and then they're the ones that
yeah.
are steeped in sort of the tradition of not playing in bars and where you're looking for that audience. And
Yeah, we definitely, I mean, that's
That
why we got off the road.
Yeah.
Renaissance Festival as well, I at least enjoyed them. Not everyone did. The audience, they don't come there to hear good music. They come there to drink. And
Right. Your background to a bunch
Right.
of mugs being clinked
Exactly,
and raised.
exactly.
Which has its place.
Yes, it does.
What was the name of the tune that you played?
That was the Black Box. Thanks.
Okay.
Yes.
And what are you going to take us out with?
With Mrs. McGraw, sort of the earliest anti-war song there ever
good.
was, from the 60s.
Which 60s? 1860s?
16, I think.
Oh, great. Thanks.
Mrs. McGraw, the sergeant said, would you like to make a soldier out of your sad? with a scarlet coat and a fine cocked hat. Yeah, Mrs. McGraw, wouldn't you like that?
Yet to me to raya, ba-da-diddle-ha, to raya, yet to me to raya, ba-da-diddle-ha, to raya.
From the seashore, for the space of 7 long years and more, she saw a big ship sailing the bay. Hallelujah, babaloo, I think it's he. Now, Captain dear, where have you been? Have you been out sailing the Mediterranean? Have you been hiding my suntan? Is the poor boy living or is he dead?
Yet to me to raya, ba-da-diddle-ha, to raya, yet to me to raya, ba-da-diddle-ha, to raya.
Poor
Mrs. McGraw.
The January edition. See you next month in the Coffee House.